If you ever receive a text message at your husband's funeral saying he is still alive, do not look at the coffin first. Look at your children. That sentence has haunted me every single day since the morning I buried Daniel Carter. My name is Margaret Carter, though everyone in our small Pennsylvania town calls me Maggie, and at 66 years old I believed I had already lived through every kind of heartbreak life could invent. I was wrong. The day of my husband's funeral began with silence so heavy it felt unnatural. The cemetery sat on the edge of town beside a narrow road lined with bare maple trees swaying beneath a gray November sky. The cold air smelled like wet dirt and dying leaves. I remember standing beside Daniel's coffin with my black gloves trembling in my hands while the pastor spoke about eternal peace and loving memories. I barely heard a single word. 42 years of marriage cannot be summarized in a 10-minute funeral speech. 42 years cannot fit inside a polished wooden box lowered into frozen ground. Daniel had been my entire world since I was 23 years old. He was the kind of man who fixed broken lawnmowers for neighbors without charging them a dime and spent every Sunday morning making pancakes shaped like animals for our boys when they were little. Even after our sons grew older and moved away, Daniel still woke up at 5:30 every morning to open his repair shop on Main Street. He believed honest work kept a man alive. I used to tease him that he would probably die holding a wrench in one hand and a coffee mug in the other. I never imagined I would be standing beside his grave while my own children stared at their watches waiting for the ceremony to end. Jason stood a few feet away wearing an expensive charcoal coat and dark sunglasses even though the sun never appeared that morning. My oldest son looked more irritated than heartbroken. Beside him stood his wife Vanessa, perfectly dressed in designer black, occasionally glancing down at her phone beneath the sleeve of her coat. My younger son Ryan kept his hands in his pockets the entire service and barely looked at the coffin once. Something about the three of them felt wrong. I noticed it the moment I arrived at the cemetery, but grief has a strange way of making you ignore the things your instincts are screaming at you to see. Then my phone vibrated. At first I almost ignored it. I assumed it was another condolence message from someone in town. But the vibration came again, sharper this time, as though whoever was sending it refused to be ignored. I slowly reached into my purse and pulled out my phone while the pastor continued speaking over the sound of the wind. Unknown number. I opened the message. Maggie. I'm alive. I felt the blood drain from my face. My knees nearly gave out beneath me. The message continued. That's not me inside the coffin. For several seconds I could not breathe. The cemetery around me suddenly felt distant and unreal, like I was standing inside someone else's nightmare. I stared at the words over and over again, trying to force my brain to make sense of them. Daniel was dead. I had watched doctors disconnect the machines. I had signed the paperwork myself. I had kissed his forehead in the hospital room while it was still warm. My fingers shook violently as I typed a response. Who is this? A new message appeared almost instantly. I can't say. They are watching us. Don't trust the children. My eyes slowly lifted from the screen toward Jason and Ryan standing beside the grave. At that exact moment Jason looked directly at me. Not at the coffin. At me. His expression tightened for half a second before he forced a concerned smile onto his face. You okay, Mom? He asked loudly enough for the others to hear. The sound of his voice sent ice through my chest. I quickly locked my phone and shoved it back into my purse. I'm fine, I whispered, though nothing about me was fine anymore. The pastor finished his prayer and the funeral director nodded toward the workers preparing to lower the coffin into the ground. Vanessa leaned close to Jason and quietly said something that made him glance impatiently toward the hearse parked nearby. Ryan rubbed his forehead like a man exhausted from a business meeting instead of a son burying his father. Suddenly memories from the hospital began crashing through my mind with terrifying clarity. Jason discussing insurance policies beside Daniel's ICU bed. Ryan asking nurses strange questions about medical paperwork. Vanessa insisting we keep the funeral private and quick because Daniel hated attention. None of it had felt important at the time. but now every detail returned sharper than broken glass. My phone vibrated again. Do not let them put you in the nursing home. I nearly gasped out loud. Nobody except my sons knew about the conversations they had been having with me for months about selling my house and moving me into assisted living. I looked down at the fresh dirt piled beside Daniel's grave and a horrifying thought entered my mind for the first time. What if my husband had not died naturally at all? The workers began lowering the coffin slowly into the earth while the ropes creaked against the metal frame. I heard myself crying, but the sound felt far away. Jason placed one hand on my shoulder, but instead of comfort I felt revulsion crawl through my skin. Dad's finally at peace, he murmured softly. I turned my head and looked directly into my son's eyes. For one brief moment, I saw something there that terrified me far more than grief ever could. Relief. The ride home from the cemetery felt longer than any road I had ever traveled in my life. Jason insisted on driving me back to the house because he claimed I was too emotional to be alone, but the truth was I no longer wanted to be alone with either of my sons. Rain tapped softly against the windshield while the heater hummed inside Jason's luxury SUV. Vanessa sat in the front passenger seat scrolling through her phone while Ryan followed behind us in his silver sedan. Nobody spoke for nearly 10 minutes. The silence inside that vehicle felt suffocating, thick with things nobody wanted to say out loud. I sat in the back seat clutching my purse so tightly my fingers hurt because my phone rested inside it like a loaded weapon. I kept replaying the messages over and over inside my head. I am alive. Do not trust the children. Every time I glanced toward Jason in the rearview mirror, I noticed something strange. He did not look like a grieving son. He looked distracted. Nervous. Like a man waiting for something important to happen. When we finally pulled into my driveway, I stared at the old white farmhouse Daniel and I had shared for 42 years. The porch. Light glowed softly against the rainy afternoon, and for one painful second I imagined Daniel sitting in his favorite rocking chair with a coffee mug in his hand waiting for me to come home. My chest tightened so hard I almost could not breathe. Jason turned off the engine and immediately looked back at me. Mom, Vanessa, and I think it would be better if somebody stayed with you tonight. His voice sounded overly careful, like someone speaking to a patient recovering from surgery. I will be fine, I answered quietly. I just want to rest. Vanessa turned around in her seat and gave me one of her polished smiles that never reached her eyes. Maggie, we are worried about you. You have barely eaten in days and the grief can do terrible things to people emotionally. There was something cold hidden beneath her sweetness. I had ignored that tone for years because Daniel always told me keeping peace inside a family mattered more than pride. But now, after those messages, I heard every word differently. I said I will be fine, I repeated more firmly. Jason exchanged a quick look with Vanessa before stepping out into the rain. He hurried around the vehicle and opened my door like a dutiful son, but when he touched my arm I felt my stomach twist. Inside the house the silence hit me immediately. Daniel's boots still sat beside the front door. His reading glasses rested on the end table near his recliner. A half-finished crossword puzzle remained folded beside the lamp exactly where he left it 3 days earlier before leaving for work that morning. My husband had vanished from the world so suddenly that the house itself still expected him to walk back through the door. Vanessa began gathering empty coffee cups from the kitchen counter without asking while Jason loosened his tie and looked around the living room with an expression I could not fully understand. Ryan arrived moments later carrying several grocery bags. We picked up food for you, he said quickly. You should not be alone right now. Again that same tone. Not loving. Not comforting. Controlled. Careful. Like people following instructions. My phone vibrated softly inside my purse. My heart nearly stopped. I excused myself and walked toward the downstairs bathroom before pulling the phone out with shaking hands. Unknown number. Do not eat or drink. Anything they give you. I stared at the message until the words blurred. A cold wave rolled through my body so violently I had to grip the sink to steady myself. Was somebody truly warning me? Or was someone deliberately trying to make me paranoid? I slowly looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My face looked pale and exhausted. My eyes were swollen from crying. For the first time in my life, I understood how easily grief could make someone question reality itself. But then another memory surfaced. 2 weeks before Daniel died, Jason had shown up unexpectedly one evening carrying financial papers and brochures for assisted living communities outside Pittsburgh. He spoke for nearly an hour about safety, healthcare access, and simplifying our lives. Daniel had remained unusually quiet during the entire conversation until finally saying, "I built this house with my own hands. I am not dying in some apartment where strangers manage my medication." Jason laughed awkwardly at the time, but I remembered the anger hidden behind his smile. "Dad, you are being stubborn," he had said. "You and Mom cannot keep living like it is 1985. Back then I thought it was simply frustration. Now I wondered if it had been something much darker. When I returned to the kitchen, Vanessa was pouring coffee into 4 mugs. The smell instantly made my stomach tighten because Daniel drank coffee every single morning without fail. She slid 1 mug toward me. "This will help calm your nerves." I froze. My eyes drifted toward Jason. He watched me too carefully. Ryan suddenly busied himself unpacking containers of food onto the counter without looking at me directly. The room felt wrong. Every instinct inside me screamed that something terrible had shifted in my family and I was only beginning to understand it. "I think I just need water," I said softly. Vanessa's smile flickered for the briefest second before returning. "Of course." She carried the coffee mugs into the living room while I opened the refrigerator and grabbed a bottled water instead. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped it. During dinner I barely touched my food while Jason discussed practical matters in a voice disturbingly similar to the one he used during business meetings. Funeral expenses. Insurance paperwork. Property taxes. Daniel had not even been buried for 3 hours and already my sons were discussing money again. "There is another thing we should probably start thinking about," Jason finally said while folding his napkin carefully beside his plate. "The house." My heartbeat slowed into a cold heavy rhythm inside my chest. "What about it?" Jason leaned back in his chair. "It is too much for one person to manage alone. The stairs. The maintenance. The heating bills during winter. We just want to make sure you are taken care of." Ryan nodded immediately. "There are some really nice retirement communities outside Harrisburg. Places with medical staff and security." Security. The word echoed inside my head. I looked slowly from one son to the other while rain continued falling outside the kitchen windows. Then my phone vibrated again inside my purse. The vibration inside my purse felt so loud I was certain everyone at the table could hear it. Jason stopped talking mid-sentence and glanced toward me while Ryan quietly sipped his coffee. Vanessa folded her hands together on the table with that same polished expression she always wore whenever she wanted something. For a moment nobody moved. The rain outside had grown heavier, rattling softly against the kitchen windows while the old clock above the stove ticked loudly in the silence. I forced myself to keep my breathing steady and slowly reached for my purse. "Probably Dora's checking on me," I said casually, though my voice sounded thinner than I intended. Jason gave a short nod but continued watching me too carefully. I pulled out the phone beneath the table and looked down at the screen. Unknown number. "Whatever you do, do not sign anything tonight." My stomach tightened instantly. I locked the screen before anyone could notice my expression and slid the phone back into my purse. Then I looked up and forced myself to smile. "Dora says she is bringing over one of her casseroles tomorrow." Vanessa laughed softly. "That woman still cooks like it is 1975. Normally I would have defended my friend immediately, but tonight my mind was racing too fast to care about Vanessa's usual comments. "Do not sign anything tonight." Why would somebody warn me about that specifically? Jason suddenly reached into the leather briefcase beside his chair and pulled out a thick stack of papers. My blood ran cold. Actually, Mom, he began gently, there are a few things we should probably handle now, while we are all together. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat but said nothing. Jason spread the documents neatly across the kitchen table like a businessman preparing for a meeting. This is just temporary paperwork to help us manage some of Dad's affairs while you recover emotionally. Recover emotionally. The phrase sounded rehearsed. What kind of paperwork? I asked carefully. Jason adjusted his glasses before answering. Power of attorney for financial matters. Nothing permanent. It just allows Ryan and me to help with bills, insurance claims, property taxes, things like that. Every instinct inside me screamed at once. Daniel had handled our finances for decades, but I was not helpless. I balanced our accounts every month. I paid our utilities. I knew exactly how much money we had in savings. Yet suddenly, only hours after the funeral, my sons were trying to place legal control of everything into their own hands. Vanessa leaned forward sympathetically. Maggie, nobody expects you to handle all this stress alone right now. Her tone dripped with artificial compassion. You are grieving. People make mistakes when they are overwhelmed emotionally. I stared at the papers on the table. Some pages already had sticky notes marking where I would need to sign. My fingers felt numb. I think this can wait, I said quietly. Jason's smile faded slightly. Mom, delaying this could create problems with the insurance payout. There it was again. Insurance. Money. Every conversation somehow returned to money. Ryan finally spoke for the first time in nearly 10 minutes. Jason is just trying to protect you. Protect me. The words sounded almost absurd now. My husband had been dead less than 24 hours and already my sons were discussing legal authority over my finances. I suddenly remembered another strange moment from the hospital 2 days earlier. While Daniel lay unconscious in intensive care, I had walked back toward his room after using the restroom and overheard Jason arguing quietly with someone on the phone near the vending machines. We need the claim processed fast, he whispered harshly. No delays. The house is already collateral. At the time I assumed stress had made him irritable. But now those words replayed in my head with terrifying clarity. The house is already collateral. Collateral for what? Mom? Jason's voice snapped me back to the present. He slid a pen across the table toward me. We really should get this done tonight. I looked down at the pen. Then at the papers. Then slowly at my sons. Ryan could barely meet my eyes. Jason looked impatient beneath his calm expression. Vanessa watched me with unsettling focus. Suddenly I understood something that made my chest tighten with fear. They were not asking. They were expecting compliance. The same way people expect a confused patient to follow medical instructions without question. My phone vibrated again. This time Jason noticed it immediately. You are getting a lot of messages tonight, he remarked casually. My pulse jumped. People from church, I lied quickly. Everyone is checking on me. He nodded slowly but his expression remained tense. I stood up from the table before anyone could respond further. I am tired, I said firmly. I am not signing anything tonight. Jason's jaw tightened instantly. Mom, you are not thinking clearly. The room went silent. The sentence hung in the air heavier than thunder. Not grieving clearly. Not emotionally overwhelmed. Not stressed. Not thinking clearly. The exact kind of language people use when they want others to question someone's mental stability. My heart began pounding harder. I think I need to sleep, I repeated. Vanessa stood immediately. Maybe that is best. But her smile had vanished now. Ryan rubbed his forehead anxiously while Jason slowly gathered the unsigned papers back into his briefcase with controlled movements. Nobody spoke for nearly a minute. Then Jason finally looked up at me again. Tomorrow morning we are meeting with a financial advisor in Harrisburg, he said carefully. I think you should come with us. Why? I asked. Because after everything that has happened, he replied slowly, we need to make sure your future is secure. Secure. The word sounded less like concern and more like a warning. I nodded weakly and excused myself before climbing the staircase to the second floor. The old wooden steps creaked beneath my feet exactly the same way they had every night for 40 years. Daniel always joked he could identify which family member was walking upstairs just by the sound of their footsteps. Halfway down the hallway I stopped outside our bedroom door and suddenly realized something horrifying. If the messages were true, if somebody really believed my sons had done something terrible to Daniel, then I might be sleeping inside the same house as the people responsible. My hands trembled as I locked the bedroom door behind me. Then I finally opened the newest message waiting on my phone. Tomorrow morning, before they wake up, go to Daniel's workshop. There is something hidden inside the red toolbox. I barely slept that night. Every sound inside the house made my body tense with fear. The old pipes rattling in the walls. The wind brushing tree branches against the roof. The soft footsteps downstairs sometime after midnight that I convinced myself probably belonged to Ryan getting water from the kitchen. But deep inside, something darker had already begun growing inside me. Doubt. Not the kind of doubt that disappears after a good night of sleep, but the kind that slowly poisons every memory you thought you understood. Around 4:30 in the morning I finally sat up in bed and stared into the darkness of the bedroom Daniel and I had shared for most of our lives. His side of the mattress remained untouched. His reading lamp still sat beside the bed with the bookmark tucked inside the Western novel he had been reading the week before he died. Tears filled my eyes again, but beneath the grief another emotion had begun taking shape. Fear. Real fear. My phone rested on the nightstand beside me. I picked it up and reread the message 3 times. Go to Daniel's workshop. There is something hidden inside the red toolbox. I checked the hallway outside my bedroom door before quietly stepping out. The house remained dark and silent. Jason and Vanessa were sleeping in the guest room downstairs while Ryan had taken the couch in the den. I moved carefully through the hallway like a stranger inside my own home. Every stair creaked beneath my feet as I descended toward the kitchen. The digital clock on the stove read 4:52 a.m. Rain still tapped softly against the windows, though the storm had weakened overnight. Daniel's workshop stood behind the house near the detached garage. He built it himself 20 years earlier using reclaimed wood and old steel roofing panels from a farm outside town. The small building smelled permanently of sawdust, oil, and coffee. Some of my happiest memories lived inside that workshop. Daniel teaching neighborhood boys how to repair engines. Christmas presents hidden beneath tarps every December. Country music playing softly on the radio while he worked late into the evening. But as I slipped on my coat and stepped into the cold darkness outside, the workshop suddenly felt less like a place of comfort and more like the center of something dangerous. The wet grass soaked through my slippers while the porch light cast long shadows across the yard. I glanced back at the farmhouse once before crossing toward the workshop door. The house looked peaceful from outside. Warm. Safe. But I no longer trusted what existed inside those walls. My hands trembled as I unlocked the workshop. The familiar scent hit me immediately the moment I stepped inside. Oil. Metal. Wood dust. Daniel. I almost broke down crying right there. His coffee mug still sat on the workbench beside an old radio. A half-repaired lawnmower engine remained disassembled beneath the hanging lamp exactly where he left it before everything changed. For several seconds I simply stood there listening to the rain hit the roof while memories crashed through me. Then I remembered why I came. The red toolbox. Daniel owned dozens of toolboxes, but only one was bright red. It sat beneath the workbench near the back wall. I knelt slowly beside it and opened the metal lid. Wrenches. Pliers. Screwdrivers. Nothing unusual at first glance. Then I noticed something strange beneath the bottom tray. A folded envelope taped carefully underneath. My heartbeat instantly accelerated. I peeled the envelope free with shaking fingers. My name was written across the front in Daniel's handwriting. Maggie. The sight of his handwriting nearly destroyed me. I sat down slowly on the cold concrete floor before opening the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small silver key attached with tape. I unfolded the letter first. Maggie, if you are reading this, something has gone very wrong. The words blurred immediately through my tears. I wiped my eyes and kept reading. I did not want to worry you before I understood things better, but over the last few months I have become increasingly uncomfortable with Jason and Ryan's behavior. They have been pressuring me about insurance policies, bank accounts, and the house almost constantly. Jason convinced me to meet with a financial advisor in Harrisburg back in September. I later discovered he had attempted to place portions of the property under shared control documents. I refused to sign anything. My chest tightened painfully. Daniel had never told me any of this. The letter continued. Ryan has accumulated serious debt. I overheard him arguing on the phone about missed payments and gambling losses. Jason appears desperate for money as well. I do not know exactly what is happening, but I know this much. They are hiding something from us. A cold wave moved through my entire body. Gambling debt. Shared property documents. None of it sounded like the sons Daniel and I raised. But the next paragraph frightened me even more. 3 weeks ago Jason brought me vitamin supplements he claimed were recommended by a specialist for heart health. Since then I have experienced dizziness several mornings after drinking coffee with breakfast. Maybe it is nothing. Maybe I am imagining things. But I trust my instincts, and my instincts tell me to be careful. I stopped breathing for several seconds. Coffee. The warning messages about food and drinks suddenly felt terrifyingly real. My eyes moved down to the final lines of the letter. If anything happens to me, use the silver key. There is a safety deposit box at First Commonwealth Bank under my name only. Everything you need is there. Do not trust anyone until you know the full truth. Not even our boys. I sat frozen on the workshop floor while rain hammered softly above me. My husband had been afraid before he died. Not confused. Not paranoid. Afraid. And somehow he had hidden all of this from me to protect me. My hand shook uncontrollably as I folded the letter back into the envelope. Then suddenly I heard something outside. Footsteps moving through wet grass toward the workshop door. My entire body froze the moment I heard those footsteps outside the workshop. The wet grass crunched softly beneath slow, careful movements approaching the door. Instinctively I shoved Daniel's letter back into the envelope and slipped it deep inside my coat pocket along with the silver key. My heart hammered so hard against my ribs I was certain whoever stood outside could hear it. For one terrifying second I imagined Jason opening the door and discovering me sitting on the floor beside the toolbox. Then the shadow moved past the workshop window. I stopped breathing. A flashlight beam briefly swept across the rain-covered yard before disappearing again. The footsteps paused directly outside the door. My hands trembled violently as I searched the workbench for something to defend myself with, but before I could move, a familiar voice spoke through the rain. Maggie? You in there? Doris. Relief hit me so suddenly my knees nearly gave out beneath me. I hurried to unlock the workshop door and found my neighbor standing outside beneath a yellow raincoat holding an umbrella in one hand and a casserole dish in the other. Lord have mercy, you scared me half to death, I whispered. Doris looked at me closely, concern immediately spreading across her face. I saw the workshop light on from my kitchen window and figured you might be out here. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her while rain drummed steadily against the roof. Doris and I had been neighbors for more than 30 years. She was the kind of woman who brought soup when someone caught the flu and baked pies for every church fundraiser in town. Daniel always joked that Doris knew everyone's business before they knew it themselves. But right now, seeing a familiar face felt like the first safe thing I had experienced since the funeral. You look pale, she said softly. Have you slept at all? I shook my head. Not really. Her eyes moved around the workshop before settling on me again. Jason told me you have been struggling pretty badly. Something inside me tightened instantly. Jason said that? Doris nodded slowly. He came by my house last night after y'all got home from the cemetery. Said he was worried you might not be handling the grief very well. My stomach dropped. What exactly did he say? Doris hesitated carefully before answering. That you were confused. Forgetful. Talking strangely. He mentioned maybe getting you professional help if things got worse. The workshop suddenly felt colder. My own son had already begun laying the groundwork. Slowly. Quietly. Carefully. He was building a story around me before I even understood the game he was playing. I forced myself to stay calm. Doris, have I seemed confused to you? She stared at me for a moment before answering firmly. Absolutely not. Tears filled my eyes instantly from sheer relief. For the first time since the funeral I felt anchored to reality again. Somebody else saw what I saw. Doris stepped closer and lowered her voice. Maggie, what is really going on? I looked toward the workshop windows to make sure nobody stood outside listening. Then I carefully pulled Daniel's letter from my coat pocket. I think my boys are hiding something from me. Doris read the letter silently while rain continued tapping against the roof. Halfway through, her expression changed from concern to disbelief. Dear God, she whispered. Daniel wrote this before he died? I nodded slowly. And there is more. I told her about the messages. The warnings. The pressure to sign paperwork. The strange conversations at the hospital. The insurance discussions. The coffee warning. By the time I finished speaking, Doris looked as shaken as I felt. Maggie, she said carefully, I do not want to scare you more than you already are, but something about all this feels wrong to me too. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? Doris glanced toward the workshop door before answering quietly. The morning Daniel died, I saw Jason's SUV parked outside your house around 5:30. My breath caught instantly. That cannot be right. Jason said he drove straight from Philadelphia after the hospital called him. Doris slowly shook her head. Well, unless somebody else in town bought the exact same black Cadillac with vanity plates, it was him. The room tilted slightly around me. Jason had lied about where he was that morning. But why? Before I could respond, my phone vibrated again inside my coat pocket. Doris and I looked at each other simultaneously. With trembling fingers I pulled out the phone and opened the newest message. You are not safe in that house anymore. Do not let them know about the letter or the key. Doris read the message over my shoulder and crossed herself immediately. Who is sending these? She whispered. I do not know. Another message arrived seconds later. Go to First Commonwealth Bank before noon. Someone there can still be trusted. My heart pounded harder. Daniel's safety deposit box. Doris looked at me with growing fear. Maggie, maybe we should call the police. I thought about that for several seconds. But what would I even say? That mysterious text messages claimed my husband might have been murdered by my own children? That Daniel hid a letter before his death warning me not to trust them? Without proof, grief could make everything sound irrational. And Jason had already started telling people I was unstable. If I went to the wrong person too early, I might destroy my only chance to learn the truth. Not yet. I whispered. Doris squeezed my hand tightly. Then you are not going anywhere alone. The clock on the workshop wall read 6:18 a.m. now. Soon Jason and the others would wake up inside the house. I folded Daniel's letter carefully and tucked it back into my coat. Then I looked around the workshop one last time. Suddenly another detail caught my attention near the coffee maker sitting beside the workbench sink. A small amber prescription bottle rested near the trash can. I walked over slowly and picked it up. The label had been partially torn away, but one word remained visible. Methanol. My blood turned to ice. My entire body froze the moment I heard those footsteps outside the workshop. The wet grass crunched softly beneath slow, careful movements approaching the door. Instinctively, I shoved Daniel's letter back into the envelope and slipped it deep inside my coat pocket along with the silver key. My heart hammered so hard against my ribs I was certain whoever stood outside could hear it. For one terrifying second I imagined Jason opening the door and discovering me sitting on the floor beside the toolbox. Then the shadow moved past the workshop window. I stopped breathing. A flashlight beam briefly swept across the rain-covered yard before disappearing again. The footsteps paused directly outside the door. My hands trembled violently as I searched the workbench for something to defend myself with, but before I could move, a familiar voice spoke through the rain. "Maggie? You in there?" "Doris." Relief hit me so suddenly my knees nearly gave out beneath me. I hurried to unlock the workshop door and found my neighbor standing outside beneath a yellow raincoat holding an umbrella in one hand and a casserole dish in the other. "Lord have mercy, you scared me half to death," I whispered. Doris looked at me closely, concern immediately spreading across her face. "I saw the workshop light on from my kitchen window and figured you might be out here." She stepped inside and closed the door behind her while rain drummed steadily against the roof. Doris and I had been neighbors for more than 30 years. She was the kind of woman who brought soup when someone caught the flu and baked pies for every church fundraiser in town. Daniel always joked that Doris knew everyone's business before they knew it themselves. But right now, seeing a familiar face felt like the first safe thing I had experienced since the funeral. "You look pale," she said softly. "Have you slept at all?" I shook my head. "Not really." Her eyes moved around the workshop before settling on me again. "Jason told me you have been struggling pretty badly." Something inside me tightened instantly. "Jason said that?" Doris nodded slowly. "He came by my house last night after y'all got home from the cemetery. Said he was worried you might not be handling the grief very well." My stomach dropped. "What exactly did he say?" Doris hesitated carefully before answering. "That you were confused. Forgetful. Talking strangely. He mentioned maybe getting you professional help if things got worse." The workshop suddenly felt colder. My own son had already begun laying the groundwork. Slowly. Quietly. Carefully. He was building a story around me before I even understood the game he was playing. I forced myself to stay calm. "Doris, have I seemed confused to you?" She stared at me for a moment before answering firmly. "Absolutely not." Tears filled my eyes instantly from sheer relief. For the first time since the funeral I felt anchored to reality again. Somebody else saw what I saw. Doris stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Maggie, what is really going on?" I looked toward the workshop windows to make sure nobody stood outside listening. Then I carefully pulled Daniel's letter from my coat pocket. "I think my boys are hiding something from me." Doris read the letter silently while rain continued tapping against the roof. Halfway through, her expression changed from concern to disbelief. "Dear God," she whispered. "Daniel wrote this before he died?" I nodded slowly. "And there is more." I told her about the messages. The warnings. The pressure to sign paperwork. The strange conversations at the hospital. The insurance discussions. The coffee warning. By the time I finished speaking, Doris looked as shaken as I felt. "Maggie," she said carefully, "I do not want to scare you more than you already are, but something about all this feels wrong to me too." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Doris glanced toward the workshop door before answering quietly. "The morning Daniel died, I saw Jason's SUV parked outside your house around 5:30. My breath caught instantly. "That cannot be right." "Jason said he drove straight from Philadelphia after the hospital called him." Doris slowly shook her head. "Well, unless somebody else in town bought the exact same black Cadillac with vanity plates, it was him." The room tilted slightly around me. Jason had lied about where he was that morning. But why? Before I could respond, my phone vibrated again inside my coat pocket. Doris and I looked at each other simultaneously. With trembling fingers I pulled out the phone and opened the newest message. You are not safe in that house anymore. Do not let them know about the letter or the key. Doris read the message over my shoulder and crossed herself immediately. Who is sending these? She whispered. I do not know. Another message arrived seconds later. Go to First Commonwealth Bank before noon. Someone there can still be trusted. My heart pounded harder. Daniel's safety deposit box. Doris looked at me with growing fear. Maggie, maybe we should call the police. I thought about that for several seconds. But what would I even say? That mysterious text messages claimed my husband might have been murdered by my own children? That Daniel hid a letter before his death warning me not to trust them? Without proof, grief could make everything sound irrational. And Jason had already started telling people I was unstable. If I went to the wrong person too early, I might destroy my only chance to learn the truth. Not yet, I whispered. Doris squeezed my hand tightly. Then you are not going anywhere alone. The clock on the workshop wall read 6:18 a.m. now. Soon Jason and the others would wake up inside the house. I folded Daniel's letter carefully and tucked it back into my coat. Then I looked around the workshop one last time. Suddenly another detail caught my attention near the coffee maker sitting beside the workbench sink. A small amber prescription bottle rested near the trash can. I walked over slowly and picked it up. The label had been partially torn away, but one word remained visible. Methanol. My blood turned to ice. My fingers tightened around the prescription bottle until they hurt. Methanol. I had heard the word before, though I could not immediately remember where. Doris took the bottle from my trembling hands and turned it beneath the workshop light. Maggie, she whispered nervously, what exactly is this used for? I swallowed hard. I do not know. But somewhere deep inside me, terror had already begun connecting pieces my mind still refused to fully accept. Daniel's dizziness. The warnings about coffee. The mysterious messages. Jason's lies. Ryan's debts. The room suddenly felt too small to breathe inside. Doris carefully placed the bottle into a rag on the workbench without touching it further. You need to hide this, she said immediately. If somebody left it here intentionally, they will come looking for it. She was right. I quickly found an old metal lunchbox beneath the workbench and wrapped the bottle inside several shop towels before locking it inside. Then I tucked the lunchbox deep behind stacks of paint cans near the back wall. Every movement felt surreal, like I had stepped inside one of those television crime dramas Daniel used to laugh at on Friday nights. Except this was my life. My family. My husband. And somehow I was standing inside his workshop hiding evidence from my own children. My phone vibrated again. Doris looked at me anxiously while I opened the latest message. They are waking up. Act normal. Do not let Jason know you found the letter. My pulse surged instantly. Whoever was sending these messages seemed to know everything happening in real time. That realization should have terrified me more than it already did, but strangely it brought a small sense of reassurance too. Somewhere out there, somebody understood what was happening. Somebody wanted me alive. Doris adjusted her raincoat nervously. You cannot stay here alone today. I have to, I replied quietly. If I suddenly disappear or start accusing them of things without proof, they will know I suspect something. Doris stared at me for several seconds before nodding reluctantly. Then at least promise me one thing. Do not eat or drink anything they hand you. Her words echoed the messages exactly. I nodded slowly. We walked back toward the house together through the cold morning rain. Smoke already curled from the kitchen chimney, which meant somebody inside was awake. My stomach tightened immediately. Through the window I could see Jason standing near the coffee maker with his back turned toward us. Doris squeezed my arm once before forcing a cheerful expression onto her face. Remember, she whispered softly, you are not crazy. Those words stayed with me as we stepped inside. The kitchen smelled strongly of fresh coffee and cinnamon toast. Vanessa sat at the table scrolling through her phone while Ryan looked half asleep beside her. Jason turned around holding a steaming coffee mug in his hand. "Mom," he said with surprise, "where were you?" His voice sounded casual, but his eyes instantly searched my face. "Could not sleep," I answered calmly. "I went to the workshop." For a fraction of a second something flickered across Jason's expression. Fear. It vanished almost instantly beneath concern. "Alone?" he asked. "You should not be wandering around in this weather." Doris immediately stepped in before I could answer. "I was with her." Jason forced a polite smile toward her, though the tension in his jaw remained visible. "Thanks for checking on Mom." Vanessa rose from the table carrying a fresh mug toward me. "I made you coffee." My entire body tightened instinctively. The steam curled upward between us while the warning messages screamed through my mind. "Do not eat or drink anything they give you." I looked at the mug. Then at Vanessa's face. She smiled too perfectly. "Actually," I said carefully, "I think tea sounds better this morning." Her smile faltered almost imperceptibly before returning. "Of course." Ryan finally spoke up. "Mom, Jason says we should leave for Harrisburg around 9. I looked toward him slowly. "For what?" Jason set his own mug down and reached for his briefcase again. "The financial advisor meeting. We need to discuss Dad's estate planning and long-term arrangements for you." Long-term arrangements. The phrase chilled me now. "I do not feel ready for meetings today," I replied softly. Jason sighed like a patient man dealing with a difficult child. "Mom, avoiding reality is not going to help." The tension inside the kitchen thickened instantly. Doris quietly placed her casserole dish on the counter and cleared her throat. "Maybe Maggie just needs another day." Jason looked irritated now. "With all respect, Doris, this is family business." Family business. Hearing my own son say those words while staring at me like a legal problem instead of his grieving mother made something inside me crack. But I forced myself to remain calm because panic would only help them. Vanessa leaned against the counter with folded arms. "Maggie, everybody is worried about you. You barely slept. You are wandering around in storms before sunrise. You keep refusing help." There it was again. The narrative. Slowly building the image of an unstable widow losing touch with reality. Ryan rubbed his temples tiredly. "Maybe we should reschedule the meeting," he muttered quietly. Jason immediately turned toward him sharply. "No. This cannot wait." The force in his voice startled everyone in the room, including Vanessa. An awkward silence followed. Then Jason forced himself to relax and looked back at me with artificial patience. "Mom, there are deadlines with insurance claims and probate filings. If we miss them, things could become financially complicated." Insurance again. Always insurance. My phone vibrated silently inside my coat pocket. I pretended not to notice it, but Jason noticed my movement immediately. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Who keeps messaging you?" The room went completely still. I forced myself to shrug casually. "Church friends." Jason stared at me for another long second before finally nodding. But something had changed now. He no longer looked merely concerned. He looked suspicious. And deep inside, for the first time since Daniel died, I realized something terrifying. Jason was beginning to understand that I was no longer blindly trusting him. The rest of the morning passed beneath a layer of tension so thick it felt impossible to breathe normally inside my own house. Doris finally left around 8:30 after hugging me tightly at the front door and whispering that she would keep her phone beside her all day. I watched her old station wagon disappear down the wet road before slowly turning back toward the kitchen where Jason stood waiting for me with folded arms. Ryan sat at the table staring down at his phone while Vanessa loaded dishes into the dishwasher with sharp impatient movements. Nobody spoke at first. The silence itself had become dangerous now. "Mom," Jason finally said calmly, "we really should leave soon if we are going to make the meeting." I removed my coat carefully and hung it beside the door, making sure Daniel's letter remained hidden deep inside the inner pocket. "I already told you I am not interested in meetings today." Jason's jaw tightened. "This is not optional anymore." The words hit me harder than if he had shouted them. Not optional. My own son standing in my kitchen speaking to me like I was a legal responsibility instead of his mother. Ryan finally looked up nervously. "Jason, maybe ease up a little." But Jason ignored him completely. "Mom, the financial advisor is also bringing someone from elder care services so we can discuss long-term planning." Elder care services. The room suddenly felt colder. Vanessa dried her hands slowly and stepped closer. "Nobody is trying to upset you, Maggie. We are simply worried about how isolated you have become." Isolated. Confused. Emotional. Every word they used sounded carefully selected, almost rehearsed. I realized then that this conversation had probably been planned before I even walked back into the house from the workshop. "I am grieving my husband," I said quietly. "That does not mean I need strangers deciding what happens to my life." Jason exhaled sharply through his nose. "Dad is gone. Somebody has to think practically now." Something inside me snapped at those words. "Your father has been dead for less than 24 hours, I whispered. "And all you can talk about is paperwork and moving me out of my home." For the first time, Jason's calm mask slipped visibly. "Because this house is falling apart," he suddenly exploded. The sound of his voice echoed through the kitchen. Ryan flinched. Vanessa immediately stepped toward him and placed a hand on his arm. But Jason pulled away angrily. "Do you know how much this place costs to maintain? The roof leaks. The plumbing barely works. Dad refused every reasonable offer I made to help modernize this place because he was too stubborn to accept reality." My heart pounded painfully in my chest. "Your father loved this house. Dad loved living like it was 1982, Jason snapped back. "And now look where that got him." The second the words left his mouth, the room went completely silent. Even Jason seemed startled by what he had accidentally revealed. My entire body went cold. Ryan stared at his brother in shock. Vanessa quickly stepped forward again. "He did not mean that the way it sounded." But I could barely hear her anymore. "And now look where that got him." The sentence echoed inside my mind with terrifying weight. Before anyone could speak again, my phone vibrated inside my coat pocket hanging beside the door. Jason's eyes instantly darted toward it. Mine did too. For one horrifying second we both stood frozen. Then Jason moved first. He walked toward the coat rack casually, but there was nothing casual about the sharp focus in his eyes. Instinctively I stepped between him and the coat. "I will get it," I said quickly. Jason stopped moving but continued watching me carefully. I reached into the pocket and pulled out the phone with trembling fingers. "Unknown number. Do not go to Harrisburg. Jason has already prepared documents declaring you mentally unstable." The blood drained from my face. I locked the phone immediately, but not before Jason noticed the sender information on the screen. Unknown number. His expression changed instantly. "Who keeps texting you?" he demanded. "Nobody important." "Let me see the phone." The request sounded less like concern now and more like authority. I tightened my grip instinctively. No. Ryan stood up immediately. "Jason, calm down." But Jason was no longer calm. "Mom has been acting strange since the funeral," he said sharply. "Sneaking around before sunrise. Refusing food. Hiding messages from everyone. Now she is getting anonymous texts." Vanessa stepped in quickly with practiced softness. "Maggie, nobody is accusing you of anything. But grief can affect people psychologically." Psychologically. The same careful language again. Slowly building the image they needed others to believe. I am not crazy, I said quietly. Jason rubbed his forehead like an exhausted caretaker. Nobody said crazy. But his eyes said it clearly enough. My phone vibrated again in my hand. Another message. Jason took one step closer. Read it out loud. Every nerve inside my body screamed danger. I looked from Jason to Ryan to Vanessa. Then something inside me finally shifted completely. The frightened grieving widow they expected me to remain was beginning to disappear. In her place something colder was forming. Careful. Alert. Watching. No, I answered calmly. Jason's expression darkened instantly. Mom, if somebody is manipulating you online during a vulnerable emotional state, we need to know. Vulnerable emotional state. More phrases for future witnesses. Future doctors. Future legal hearings. Suddenly I understood the full shape of what they were building around me. Not just financial control. Incapacitation. They wanted everyone to believe grief had destroyed my ability to think clearly. And if they succeeded, nobody would ever believe anything I discovered about Daniel's death. I slowly slipped the phone into my sweater pocket and stepped backward toward the hallway. I am going upstairs. Jason moved directly into my path. We are settling this today. His voice no longer sounded like my son's at all. For several long seconds nobody moved inside the kitchen. Jason stood directly in front of me, blocking the hallway while rainwater slid slowly down the windows behind him. Ryan looked trapped between panic and guilt. Vanessa remained perfectly still beside the counter, watching all of us with cold calculation behind her polished expression. My heart pounded so violently I thought I might faint, but strangely my fear had begun changing shape now. The more pressure Jason applied, the clearer everything became. Move, I said quietly. Jason crossed his arms. Not until you show me those messages. His tone carried authority now, not concern. It was the voice of a man accustomed to controlling situations through intimidation hidden beneath calm language. Those messages are private. Private from your own family? He asked sharply. Or private because somebody is filling your head with paranoid nonsense? There it was again. Paranoid. The word landed exactly where he wanted it to. Not spoken directly enough to sound cruel, but carefully planted so everyone in the room would begin associating me with instability. Ryan finally stepped between us slightly. Jason, maybe back off for a minute. Jason looked toward him with disbelief. You seriously do not see what is happening here? He pointed toward me. Mom is getting anonymous messages from strangers less than one day after Dad died. She is refusing food. Hiding things. Sneaking around the property before dawn. And you think this is normal? Vanessa sighed softly and approached me slowly like someone trying to calm an emotional patient. Maggie, nobody is against you. We are trying to protect you while you are vulnerable. Vulnerable. Another carefully chosen word. I suddenly realized something deeply unsettling. They had probably discussed this strategy long before Daniel died. The language sounded too prepared. Too polished. Almost professional. I am going upstairs, I repeated firmly. Jason did not move. Then hand me the phone first. Something cold passed through me at that moment. Not panic. Clarity. If I surrendered that phone, everything would disappear. The messages. The warnings. The only thread connecting me to the truth about Daniel. And perhaps whoever was trying to help me would vanish forever too. No, I answered again. Jason's face hardened completely now. Fine. He pulled his own phone from his pocket and began typing quickly. What are you doing? Ryan asked nervously. Calling Dr. Feldman. My blood ran cold instantly. Who is Dr. Feldman? Vanessa answered before Jason could. A grief specialist. Jason consulted yesterday. Yesterday. Before Daniel was even buried. I stared at them in disbelief while Jason lifted the phone to his ear. Dr. Feldman, yes, this is Jason Carter. I am calling about my mother. Her condition is worsening. My knees nearly buckled beneath me. He was doing it already. Building the case. Creating records. Establishing documentation that I was unstable. Ryan stepped closer immediately. Jason, stop this. But Jason ignored him completely. She's becoming increasingly paranoid, he continued calmly into the phone while staring directly at me. Yes. Delusions. Anonymous messages. Suspicion toward family members. Tears filled my eyes, but not from weakness anymore. From the unbearable realization that my own son was systematically trying to erase my credibility before I could uncover whatever happened to Daniel. Vanessa gently touched my arm. Maggie, please understand this is for your safety. I jerked away from her touch instantly. Do not touch me. The room fell silent again except for Jason's quiet voice speaking into the phone near the window. Ryan looked physically sick now. He kept rubbing both hands over his face like a man trapped inside a nightmare he could no longer escape. Finally Jason ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Dr. Feldman agrees you need immediate evaluation. Immediate evaluation. The word sounded terrifyingly official. I am not going anywhere with you, I whispered. Jason stepped forward again. Mom, listen carefully. If you cooperate voluntarily, this process stays simple and private. But if you keep resisting help, things become more complicated. My heartbeat slowed into something heavy and cold. What process? For the first time, Jason answered honestly. Temporary guardianship. The entire room seemed to tilt sideways. Ryan stared at his brother in complete shock. Jesus Christ, Jason. But Jason kept his eyes locked on me. You are clearly not thinking rationally right now. We can petition the court for temporary authority over your medical and financial decisions until your condition stabilizes. Temporary authority. Financial decisions. Court petition. Every horrifying piece suddenly locked together perfectly inside my mind. The meetings. The paperwork. The careful language. The concern about my mental state. This had been planned. Maybe not every detail, but enough of it. Enough to move quickly. Enough to control me before I discovered too much. My phone vibrated again inside my pocket. Jason noticed instantly. So did Vanessa. Give me the phone, he demanded. No, Mom. No, he moved toward me so suddenly that Ryan stepped between us instinctively. Back off, Ryan snapped. Jason looked stunned for half a second. You are taking her side? Ryan swallowed hard. I am saying this is getting insane. The tension between the brothers felt explosive now. Vanessa quickly stepped in again, lowering her voice carefully. Everybody needs to calm down. But nobody was calm anymore. Especially not me. Because for the first time since Daniel's death, I understood the terrifying truth completely. I was not simply grieving inside a broken family. I was trapped inside a carefully constructed situation where my own sons intended to control my life before I could expose them. And if I failed to escape their version of events soon, nobody would ever believe another word I said again. My phone vibrated once more. This time I looked directly at Jason before pulling it from my pocket and opening the message in front of everyone. Go to the bank now. Before Jason files the petition. The second Jason saw the message on my screen, every trace of fake sympathy disappeared from his face. His eyes narrowed sharply while Vanessa went completely still beside the counter. Ryan looked confused at first, then increasingly alarmed as he read the tension spreading through the room. Who sent that? Jason demanded immediately. I locked the phone and slipped it back into my pocket before answering. None of your business. He took one step toward me again, but this time Ryan blocked him fully. Enough, Ryan snapped. You are acting insane. Jason laughed bitterly. I am acting insane? Mom is getting anonymous messages telling her not to trust us, and now suddenly she wants to run to the bank? My pulse quickened because he was right about one thing. I did need to get to the bank before they stopped me. Daniel's safety deposit box might contain the only evidence left proving he knew he was in danger before he died. And judging by Jason's reaction, whatever Daniel left behind terrified him more than I originally realized. Move, I told Jason calmly. I am leaving. He folded his arms tightly across his chest. You are not driving anywhere in your current emotional state. Emotional state. Everything kept returning to those same carefully chosen phrases. I suddenly understood why. If anyone later questioned their actions, Jason wanted witnesses to remember me as unstable from the beginning. Then I will call Doris, I replied. She can drive me. Jason's jaw clenched hard enough for the muscles to twitch beneath his skin. Mom, please listen carefully. Somebody is manipulating you. Maybe somebody is finally telling me the truth. The sentence hit the room like shattered glass. Ryan stared at me in shock while Vanessa immediately stepped closer to Jason, whispering something softly beneath her breath. I could not hear the words, but whatever she said made his expression darken even further. What exactly are you accusing us of? Jason asked quietly now. Oddly enough, the softer his voice became, the more dangerous he sounded. I met his eyes directly for the first time since Daniel's funeral. I do not know yet. A long silence followed. Rain continued sliding down the kitchen windows while the old refrigerator hummed quietly behind us. Then Ryan suddenly grabbed his jacket from the chair beside the table. I will drive her. Jason turned toward him sharply. What? I said I will take Mom to the bank. Absolutely not. Ryan finally lost his patience completely. Jason, look at yourself right now. You were talking about court petitions and mental evaluations less than 2 days after Dad died. Jason pointed angrily toward me. Because she is acting irrationally. No, Ryan shot back. She is acting scared. Those words changed something inside the room instantly. For the first time, Jason looked uncertain. Only briefly. But I saw it. Fear. Not fear of losing me emotionally. Fear of losing control of the situation itself. Vanessa quickly stepped in again. Ryan, everybody is exhausted and emotional. We should all calm down before saying things we regret. But Ryan ignored her now too. Did you already talk to a lawyer? He asked Jason directly. Jason hesitated half a second too long. That was all Ryan needed. Jesus Christ, he whispered. You already did. My stomach turned cold. Jason finally exhaled heavily and rubbed both hands over his face. I was trying to protect this family. From what? Ryan demanded. From Mom asking questions? The room went dead silent again. Jason slowly lowered his hands and looked directly at his younger brother. You have no idea how bad things actually are. Ryan frowned. What does that mean? Jason glanced toward Vanessa before answering. Dad was drowning financially. My heartbeat stumbled. Painfully. That is a lie, I whispered instantly. Your father managed our finances carefully for 40 years. You do not know everything, Jason snapped. Dad took out loans against the property months ago. My mind immediately flashed back to Daniel's letter mentioning shared control documents and financial pressure. But Daniel never mentioned loans. Unless Jason himself had manipulated him into them somehow. What loans? I demanded. Jason looked frustrated now, like a man being forced to explain things before he was prepared. The shop was failing. Medical costs were rising. Dad refused to sell the house even though it was the only valuable asset left. Every sentence sounded rehearsed, but something about it felt incomplete. Like pieces were missing intentionally. Ryan looked stunned. Dad never told me any of that. Because he was embarrassed, Jason answered immediately. And because Mom refuses to accept reality about anything. There it was again. Reality. Sanity. Instability. Every path led back toward painting me as emotionally unreliable. Suddenly my phone vibrated once more. This time Jason lunged forward before I could stop him. His hand grabbed my wrist hard enough to startle me, and for one horrifying second I saw something in his face I had never seen before in my life. Not grief. Not frustration. Desperation. Pure desperation. "Give me the phone," he hissed quietly. Ryan instantly shoved him backward. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Jason stumbled against the kitchen counter while Vanessa grabbed his arm. I stared at my oldest son in absolute disbelief. My sweet little boy who used to cry whenever injured birds fell from trees was standing in my kitchen looking at me like an obstacle standing between him and something he desperately needed hidden. And then suddenly I understood another terrifying possibility. Maybe Jason was not only afraid of me discovering the truth. Maybe he was afraid of someone else discovering it too. My phone vibrated again in my shaking hand. I opened the message while all three of them watched me. The safety deposit box contains audio recordings. Jason knows about them. The moment I finished reading the message, I looked directly at Jason. I did not mean to reveal anything with my expression, but something inside me betrayed the fear racing through my body because his face changed instantly. His eyes locked onto the phone screen with terrifying intensity before he quickly masked it. Again beneath frustration. But I saw it. Ryan saw it too. Vanessa noticed it as well. Jason knew exactly what those messages were talking about. "What did it say?" he asked too quickly. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without answering. "Mom," he said more sharply this time, "what did the message say?" I stared at him silently for several seconds while rain continued falling outside the windows. Somewhere in the distance thunder rolled softly across the Pennsylvania hills. Then Ryan slowly stepped beside me instead of beside his brother. That tiny movement changed everything inside the room. Jason noticed it immediately. "You seriously believe this insanity?" he demanded. Ryan rubbed both hands over his face again. "I do not know what to believe anymore." Jason laughed bitterly. "Fantastic. So now anonymous texts are more trustworthy than your own family." Family. Hearing him use that word felt almost cruel now. Because somewhere beneath all the fear and confusion, the most painful truth of all had already begun settling into my heart. Even if Jason was innocent, even if this entire nightmare somehow turned out to be a misunderstanding, our family had already been destroyed. Nobody who truly loved their mother would try to strip away her legal rights less than 48 hours after burying her husband. Vanessa suddenly spoke up carefully. "Maggie, maybe we should all take a breath and think logically for a minute." But logic no longer existed inside this house. Fear did. Secrets did. Lies did. I slowly grabbed my purse from the kitchen counter. "I am going to the bank." Jason immediately moved again. No, Ryan stepped fully between us this time. "Back off. Ryan, move." No, the brothers stared at each other with a tension I had never witnessed before in my life. Jason had always been dominant growing up. Confident. Controlled. Ryan usually followed his lead in everything. But something had finally cracked inside the younger brother too. "You are scaring her," Ryan said quietly. Jason's expression darkened. "I am trying to stop her from making a huge mistake." "Or stop her from finding something?" The words left Ryan's mouth before he could stop them. The silence afterward felt suffocating. Vanessa immediately turned toward Ryan in disbelief. Jason's entire body went still. And in that moment I realized Ryan might not fully know what had happened to Daniel either. Maybe he suspected things. Maybe he participated in smaller ways. But whatever existed inside Jason's mind looked colder. More deliberate. More dangerous. Jason slowly lowered his voice again. "You have no idea what you are saying." Ryan swallowed hard. "Then explain it to me." But Jason did not answer. Instead, he looked directly at me again. Mom, if you walk out that door right now, things are going to get very complicated. The threat sat there between us openly now. No more pretending. No more soft language. Just control. I tightened my grip on my purse. Move. Jason shook his head once. I cannot do that. My pulse hammered painfully as I realized how trapped I truly was. If I called the police now, what would happen? Jason already had a grief specialist prepared to label me unstable. He had probably spoken to lawyers too. He knew how to manipulate systems. He understood documentation, procedures, appearances. And I was simply a grieving 66-year-old widow standing in a kitchen clutching anonymous text messages. Suddenly Ryan grabbed his car keys from the table. I am taking her. Jason turned toward him in disbelief. Ryan. I mean it. Jason's face hardened completely now. You are making a mistake. Ryan looked terrified but determined. Maybe. But I cannot stand here pretending this is normal anymore. Vanessa stepped quickly toward Ryan. Think carefully before you destroy this family over conspiracy theories. Ryan laughed bitterly at that. Destroy this family? Look around, Vanessa. Dad is dead. Mom is terrified of us. Jason already has doctors and lawyers involved. This family is already destroyed. The truth of those words hit me like a knife straight through my chest. Jason suddenly slammed his hand against the counter hard enough to make everyone jump. You are all acting like I killed him. Nobody answered. Not immediately. But the silence itself became the answer. Jason looked around the room and seemed to realize it too. His breathing grew heavier. You think I wanted Dad dead? He whispered. Tears suddenly filled his eyes, but even then something about them felt wrong. Not fake exactly. More complicated than that. Like a man grieving consequences instead of loss. Dad was impossible, he muttered quietly. He would not listen to anyone. He refused help. Refused to sell the property. Refused to modernize anything. His voice cracked slightly. Do you know how much debt he was hiding? My heart tightened painfully again. Debt. Loans. Insurance. Daniel's letter. None of it fit together cleanly yet. Jason rubbed both hands over his face before speaking again. You all think you understand what is happening, but you do not. Then explain it, Ryan demanded again. Jason opened his mouth like he might finally say something important. Something real. But before he could speak, my phone vibrated once more. All four of us froze instantly. My hand shook as I slowly pulled the phone out again. Unknown number. Jason is stalling because someone from the court is already on the way to the house. My blood turned cold as I read the message. Court. The word alone felt suffocating. I looked up slowly from the phone toward Jason, and the second our eyes met, I knew he understood something had changed. He could not see the message itself, but he saw the fear on my face. And instead of looking confused or concerned, he looked tense. Cornered. Like a man watching a clock run out. What now? He asked carefully. I slipped the phone back into my purse without answering. Ryan looked between us anxiously. Mom? Before I could speak, headlights suddenly swept across the front windows of the farmhouse. Everyone froze. A car door slammed outside. Then another. Vanessa quietly inhaled beside the counter while Jason closed his eyes for one brief moment. That tiny reaction confirmed everything. He had been expecting them. My chest tightened painfully. Who is outside? Ryan asked. Nobody answered him. A knock echoed through the front door. 3 slow, heavy knocks that sounded official. Jason immediately straightened his posture and adjusted his sleeves like a businessman preparing for a meeting. Stay calm, he said quietly. Stay calm. Not who could that be? Not let me see. Stay calm. Ryan looked at him in disbelief now. Jason, what did you do? Another knock came. Louder this time. Vanessa quickly moved toward the hallway mirror and fixed her expression while Jason walked toward the front door without looking at any of us. My legs suddenly felt weak beneath me. Every instinct screamed that if I let strangers walk into this house and declare me unstable, I might lose control of my entire life before reaching the bank. Jason opened the door. A tall woman in a gray coat stood outside holding a leather folder against her chest while a uniformed county deputy waited beside the porch steps. Rain dripped steadily from the edges of their coats. Mr. Carter? The woman asked politely. Jason nodded. Thank you for coming. The words hit me like ice water. Thank you for coming. This was planned. The woman stepped inside slowly and gave me a professional smile. Mrs. Margaret Carter? I could barely speak. Yes. My name is Elaine Porter. I am a family services evaluator with Dauphin County. Ryan swore softly under his breath. The deputy remained near the door, calm but observant. Elaine glanced briefly toward Jason before returning her attention to me. Your son expressed concerns about your emotional and cognitive well-being following a recent traumatic loss. Every word sounded polished and rehearsed. Cognitive well-being. Traumatic loss. Concerns. It felt less like a conversation and more like the beginning of my erasure. I do not need an evaluation, I said immediately. Elaine maintained her calm smile. This is only an informal welfare assessment, Mrs. Carter. Informal. Another harmless-sounding word hiding something much larger behind it. Jason stepped beside her with practiced concern. Mom has been under severe emotional distress since Dad passed. Severe emotional distress? Ryan snapped. Her husband died 2 days ago. Elaine nodded sympathetically. Which is exactly why these situations require careful support. She opened the folder slowly. Your son mentioned paranoia, suspicious behavior, and communication with anonymous individuals encouraging irrational fears. My heart pounded harder. Jason had already built the story completely. Anonymous individuals. Irrational fears. I suddenly realized how impossible this situation looked from the outside. An elderly widow receiving mysterious text messages claiming her husband might still be alive. If I tried explaining everything now, I would sound exactly like the unstable person Jason described. Elaine looked around the kitchen calmly. Mrs. Carter, have you been sleeping normally? I stared at her in disbelief. What? Sleeping. Eating. Maintaining emotional regulation. Emotional regulation. They had their own language for stripping people apart while sounding compassionate. This is insane, Ryan muttered. Jason ignored him completely. Mom has also become increasingly distrustful toward family members. Elaine wrote something inside her folder. The scratching sound of her pen against paper made my stomach twist. Records. Documentation. Evidence against me. I am grieving, I whispered. Not unstable. Elaine's expression softened professionally. Of course. But grief can sometimes create temporary distortions in perception. Distortions in perception. My pulse roared in my ears now. Every sentence pushed me further into the role Jason designed for me. Confused widow. Emotional deterioration. Paranoia. Ryan suddenly stepped forward beside me. She is not confused. Jason shot him a warning look instantly. Ryan. But Ryan kept going. This whole thing feels wrong. Elaine turned toward him carefully. In what way? Ryan hesitated. I could see the battle happening inside him. Fear. Loyalty. Doubt. Then his eyes shifted briefly toward Jason. And Jason noticed. The tension between them thickened instantly. Ryan? Jason asked quietly. Something about his voice sounded dangerous again. Ryan swallowed hard. I just think this is happening way too fast. Elaine closed her folder slowly. Mr. Carter, are there concerns about your mother's ability to safely manage her financial or medical affairs independently? Jason answered immediately. Yes. The speed of his response made Ryan visibly recoil. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of strangers. Not while my own son calmly dismantled my credibility piece by piece. My phone vibrated again inside my purse. The sound seemed deafening inside the silent kitchen. Everyone heard it. Elaine looked toward my purse. Jason did too. My hand shook as I slowly reached for the phone. Unknown number. Do not let Elaine Porter leave. She is not working for the county. My blood turned cold as I read the message. Court. The word alone felt suffocating. I looked up slowly from the phone toward Jason, and the second our eyes met, I knew he understood something had changed. He could not see the message itself, but he saw the fear on my face. And instead of looking confused or concerned, he looked tense. Cornered. Like a man watching a clock run out. What now? He asked carefully. I slipped the phone back into my purse without answering. Ryan looked between us anxiously. Mom? Before I could speak, headlights suddenly swept across the front windows of the farmhouse. Everyone froze. A car door slammed outside. Then another. Vanessa quietly inhaled beside the counter while Jason closed his eyes for one brief moment. That tiny reaction confirmed everything. He had been expecting them. My chest tightened painfully. Who was outside? Ryan asked. Nobody answered him. A knock echoed through the front door. 3 slow, heavy knocks that sounded official. Jason immediately straightened his posture and adjusted his sleeves like a businessman preparing for a meeting. Stay calm, he said quietly. Stay calm. Not who could that be? Not let me see. Stay calm. Ryan looked at him in disbelief now. Jason, what did you do? Another knock came. Louder this time. Vanessa quickly moved toward the hallway mirror and fixed her expression while Jason walked toward the front door without looking at any of us. My legs suddenly felt weak beneath me. Every instinct screamed that if I let strangers walk into this house and declare me unstable, I might lose control of my entire life before reaching the bank. Jason opened the door. A tall woman in a gray coat stood outside holding a leather folder against her chest while a uniformed county deputy waited beside the porch steps. Rain dripped steadily from the edges of their coats. Mr. Carter? The woman asked politely. Jason nodded. Thank you for coming. The words hit me like ice water. Thank you for coming. This was planned. The woman stepped inside slowly and gave me a professional smile. Mrs. Margaret Carter? I could barely speak. Yes. My name is Elaine Porter. I am a family services evaluator with Dauphin County. Ryan swore softly under his breath. The deputy remained near the door, calm but observant. Elaine glanced briefly toward Jason before returning her attention to me. Your son expressed concerns about your emotional and cognitive well-being following a recent traumatic loss. Every word sounded polished and rehearsed. Cognitive well-being. Traumatic loss. Concerns. It felt less like a conversation and more like the beginning of my erasure. I do not need an evaluation, I said immediately. Elaine maintained her calm smile. This is only an informal welfare assessment, Mrs. Carter. Informal. Another harmless-sounding word hiding something much larger behind it. Jason stepped beside her with practiced concern. Mom has been under severe emotional distress since Dad passed. Severe emotional distress? Ryan snapped. Her husband died 2 days ago. Elaine nodded sympathetically. Which is exactly why these situations require careful support. She opened the folder slowly. Your son mentioned paranoia, suspicious behavior, and communication with anonymous individuals encouraging irrational fears. My heart pounded harder. Jason had already built the story completely. Anonymous individuals. Irrational fears. I suddenly realized how impossible this situation looked from the outside. An elderly widow receiving mysterious text messages claiming her husband might still be alive. If I tried explaining everything now, I would sound exactly like the unstable person Jason described. Elaine looked around the kitchen calmly. "Mrs. Carter, have you been sleeping normally?" I stared at her in disbelief. "What? Sleeping. Eating. Maintaining emotional regulation." Emotional regulation. They had their own language for stripping people apart while sounding compassionate. "This is insane," Ryan muttered. Jason ignored him completely. "Mom has also become increasingly distrustful toward family members." Elaine wrote something inside her folder. The scratching sound of her pen against paper made my stomach twist. Records. Documentation. Evidence against me. "I am grieving," I whispered. "Not unstable." Elaine's expression softened professionally. "Of course. But grief can sometimes create temporary distortions in perception." Distortions in perception. My pulse roared in my ears now. Every sentence pushed me further into the role Jason designed for me. Confused widow. Emotional deterioration. Paranoia. Ryan suddenly stepped forward beside me. "She is not confused." Jason shot him a warning look instantly. "Ryan." But Ryan kept going. "This whole thing feels wrong." Elaine turned toward him carefully. "In what way?" Ryan hesitated. I could see the battle happening inside him. Fear. Loyalty. Doubt. Then his eyes shifted briefly toward Jason. And Jason noticed. The tension between them thickened instantly. "Ryan?" Jason asked quietly. Something about his voice sounded dangerous again. Ryan swallowed hard. "I just think this is happening way too fast." Elaine closed her folder slowly. "Mr. Carter, are there concerns about your mother's ability to safely manage her financial or medical affairs independently?" Jason answered immediately. "Yes." The speed of his response made Ryan visibly recoil. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of strangers. Not while my own son calmly dismantled my credibility piece by piece. My phone vibrated again inside my purse. The sound seemed deafening inside the silent kitchen. Everyone heard it. Elaine looked toward my purse. Jason did too. My hand shook as I slowly reached for the phone. Unknown number. "Do not let Elaine Porter leave. She is not working for the county." My entire body went numb after reading the message. Not working for the county. I stared at the words while every sound inside the kitchen seemed to fade into distant static. Rain striking the windows. The refrigerator humming softly. Elaine Porter calmly shifting papers inside her leather folder. Jason watching my face with growing tension. If the message was true, then nothing happening inside this house was official at all. It was theater. Carefully staged theater designed to isolate me before I reached whatever Daniel left inside that safety deposit box. My hands trembled violently around the phone. Elaine tilted her head slightly. "Mrs. Carter?" I slowly lifted my eyes toward her. She looked professional. Calm. Polished. But suddenly I noticed small details I missed before. No county identification badge. No official paperwork with seals or signatures visible inside the folder. Even the deputy standing near the door had remained strangely passive the entire time, almost like hired security instead of law enforcement. Jason took one careful step toward me. "Mom, nobody here wants to hurt you." Hurt. Interesting choice of word. Not help. Not support. Hurt. My heartbeat thundered so loudly I could barely think straight anymore. But beneath the fear, another feeling finally emerged completely. Anger. Not loud anger. Cold anger. The kind that sharpens every instinct instead of clouding it. Daniel had died afraid. He hid letters and keys because he knew something terrible was happening around us. And now strangers were standing inside my kitchen trying to convince me I could no longer trust my own mind. I slowly slipped the phone back into my purse. I would like to see identification, I said calmly. Jason's expression changed instantly. Elaine smiled professionally. Of course. She reached into her coat and produced a laminated card quickly. Too quickly. Like someone prepared for the request in advance. I stepped closer and studied it carefully. The logo looked legitimate at first glance, but the printing quality seemed oddly cheap around the edges. I spent 40 years helping Daniel manage invoices and business documents. Small details mattered. Cheap lamination. Slightly crooked alignment. Tiny things ordinary people overlooked. May I hold it? I asked. For the first time, Elaine hesitated. Only briefly. But I saw it. Jason saw it too. Mrs. Carter, she replied smoothly, there is really no need for hostility. Hostility. Another carefully chosen word designed to paint me as irrational. Ryan noticed the hesitation too. His eyes narrowed slightly as he looked between Elaine and Jason. Why can she not hold the card? Jason immediately stepped in. Ryan, enough. But Ryan ignored him now. No. Seriously. Why not? Elaine slowly lowered the identification card. The calm smile on her face began tightening around the edges. This situation is becoming emotionally escalated, she said carefully. Perhaps we should continue this conversation later. And there it was. Retreat. Not reassurance. Not clarification. Retreat. My pulse quickened again as realization slammed into me. Whoever these people were, they never expected resistance. They expected a frightened grieving widow too overwhelmed to question authority. Jason moved quickly toward Elaine. Wait. His voice carried panic now beneath the calm surface. We are almost done here. Almost done. The words chilled me. Done with what exactly? Ryan looked at his brother in complete disbelief. Jason, who are these people? Jason opened his mouth, but before he could answer, another car suddenly pulled into the driveway outside. This time everyone reacted. Elaine turned sharply toward the front windows. The deputy near the door straightened instantly. Jason's face drained of color. Then my phone vibrated again. Real county officers just arrived. Do not let Jason leave. Before I could even process the message, hard knocks echoed across the front door. Not polite knocks this time. Official ones. Loud. Direct. The deputy near the entrance looked immediately toward Elaine. And in that exact second, everything inside the room changed. Fear flashed openly across Elaine's face. Real fear. Jason stepped backward slowly. Vanessa whispered something under her breath. Ryan stared at all of them like the floor had vanished beneath him. Another knock thundered through the house. Dauphin County Sheriff's Department, a voice called from outside. Open the door. The silence afterward felt enormous. Elaine slowly closed her folder. The deputy beside the door no longer looked calm. He looked trapped. Jason finally turned toward me again, and for the first time since Daniel died, I saw genuine terror in my son's eyes. Not grief. Not frustration. Terror. Mom, he whispered quietly, you do not understand. I looked directly at him. Then explain it. His breathing grew uneven. Vanessa grabbed his arm tightly. Jason. But Ryan stepped forward instead. No, he said firmly. He is finally going to tell the truth. Another knock rattled the front door. Open the door now. Jason closed his eyes briefly like a man standing at the edge of something irreversible. Then slowly, almost brokenly, he looked back at me. Dad knew about the insurance changes, he whispered. My entire body went cold. Ryan stared at him in shock. What? Jason rubbed both hands over his face shakily. The business was collapsing. The debts were worse than anyone realized. Dad agreed to increase the life insurance policy 6 months ago. None of it explained the lies. The fake evaluator. The messages. Daniel's fear. Jason looked toward the floor. But then Dad changed his mind about everything. The room felt silent enough to hear breathing. He said he was going to expose all of us. Us. Not me. Us. Ryan took one slow step backward like he had just been struck. Outside, another sheriff vehicle pulled into the driveway. Red and blue lights flashed across the rain-soaked windows while my oldest son stood in my kitchen looking like a stranger I had never truly known at all.